All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to LNG Unpacked Business, Climate, and Energy Futures. Thank you so much for joining us. The session today is being co-presented by the BC Climate Emergency Campaign along with BC Green Business, and we're super excited to be working together to present this session for you. This is the first webinar in a four-part series that the BC Climate Emergency Campaign will be hosting over the coming months, which will be targeting different sectors. And of course, today we are focused on business, and we're really happy to have all of you joining us for this very first session. So I just wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement here. I'm calling in today from Toronto, which is the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Chippewa, and the Mississaugas of the Credit, Treaty 13 territory. But this image that you see on your screen is actually an image of Gitniao territory, which is in northern BC. And the reason that I wanted to share that image was because the Gitniao are currently going through a bit of a challenging time. There was a pipeline that was recently approved, which crosses a significant portion of their territory, and their hereditary chiefs have been very outspoken about their opposition to that project, and yet it recently got approved anyways. And so, of course, today's session is focused on LNG, mostly in the BC context. And there are a number of different project fights going on currently. And I think it's just important to remember that the majority of so-called British Columbia is unceded territory and unsurrendered territory. And so whenever we're talking about LNG or fossil fuels, we always need to be talking about Indigenous sovereignty and the fight for climate justice as well. So after a brief introduction, I'm going to start us off today with an overview of LNG. I'll be walking us through the environmental impacts of it, the health impacts, affordability impacts, etc. After that, I will pass it over to Deep from BC Green Business to make those business connections. And then we will have time for a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, please try to save them, and we'll hope to get to them at the end of the webinar. If you have any burning ones, you can throw them into the chat, and we'll either answer them there or hopefully be able to answer them at the very end. And we are planning on wrapping up by 1 p.m. A little bit about me. My name is Emiko Newman, and I'm the coordinator of the BC Climate Emergency Campaign. We are a group of civil society organizations who have come together to push the BC government for a more ambitious climate emergency plan. Clean BC is not the climate emergency plan that we need. And our call for this kind of ambitious action has been endorsed by 615 organizations throughout the province who come from a diverse range of sectors, including labor and housing and faith groups, businesses as well, including BC Green Business, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a little bit about us. And at the end, I will share a little bit about how you can get involved with the campaign if you so desire. And Deep here, who will be speaking shortly, is with BC Green Business, but I will allow him to do his own little bio once I pass it to him. So why are we talking about LNG, and why now? We're actually in a bit of a pivotal moment. So something momentous happened earlier this month, which is that Canada officially began exporting LNG. Up until now, we have never sent our LNG overseas. But as of just a few days ago, LNG Canada Phase 1 started operating. It's located in Kitimat, BC. And as we speak, there are tankers heading to Asia with LNG from BC on it. And this has a lot of implications, which you'll be hearing about very soon. And it's also important to share a little bit about the other projects that are possibly coming through. There are 6 other projects right now that are either approved or awaiting approval or under construction, including that pipeline that I mentioned through Gatineau territory. If those projects go ahead, that would mean 47 million tons of LNG being shipped overseas every single year. And once that LNG gets burned, that would mean 125 million tons of carbon pollution entering the atmosphere. So it's pretty significant. What is LNG? Let's just start with the basics here. LNG is liquefied natural gas, but there is nothing good or clean about natural gas. Natural gas is primarily methane, which is a very potent fossil fuel, and in fact, much more potent than carbon dioxide. I think when people hear the word, emissions or fossil fuel, often carbon dioxide is what comes to mind, but methane actually traps 105 times more heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide over a 10-year time period. So it's very dangerous. And, the term natural gas is a really clear example of greenwashing. So whoever came up with that term for it was very clever, because people hear the word natural and they think, oh, that's great, must be good for the climate. And so there is kind of a movement happening of folks trying to say, hey, let's move away from natural gas. Let's call it methane gas instead. Let's call it what it is, or even let's call it fracked gas instead. So you might hear those terms used interchangeably. And natural gas is obtained through a process called hydraulic fracturing or fracking, which is an incredibly destructive process. It takes a mixture of water and chemicals and injects that deep, deep, deep underground, shattering the rock so that the gas escapes, which is then captured. But fracking requires billions of liters of fresh water every year, which is taken from streams and rivers. Keep in mind that many parts of BC have been experiencing drought for a long time, and yet fracking companies are still allowed to take up these billions of liters every year, which they pay hardly anything for, by the way. And what happens is that once that water is used for fracking, it can never enter the water cycle again because it's now become so toxic. In fact, it has to be kept in these giant ponds, which are covered at all times, because if a bird lands on the water or an animal drinks from the water, it will die. That's how toxic this water has become. Fracking also leads to earthquakes. So last year alone, there's a particular area of BC, northern BC, that borders on Alberta, that experienced 34 earthquakes directly caused by fracking. And I want to speak to a myth that some of you may have heard. This sort of thing is repeated frequently. Mari, you can go to the next point there. So it's that natural gas is at least cleaner than coal. So it is an important transition fuel. We need it to get other countries off of dirty coal. I'm sure you have all heard this at some point, and I want to speak about why this is actually completely false. So yes, Mari, we can go to the next. As you'll see here, if you look at the emissions created from burning coal and burning gas, in fact, yes, gas is cleaner burning, leads to fewer emissions. But we need to look at the full life cycle of LNG. So you have the extraction through fracking, you have the processing, you have the liquefying, the transporting, the regasifying on the other side, and then the burning. Through that entire life cycle, as you can see, natural gas actually ends up creating more emissions. So what's really important is the upstream emissions, the emissions that are released before the thing is even burned. And the thing about natural gas, as I mentioned, it's methane and it leaks. So when you are looking at that entire life cycle, you're having methane leaking when it's being fracked, when it's being transported, when it's on the tankers, and then even when it's burned. So if you ever hear somebody say, well, we need gas because it's cleaner than coal, you can say, actually, no, that's not true. So those are the main environmental impacts of liquefied natural gas, and it's harmful to our health as well. So research shows that in communities near fracking sites, doctors have found staggering rates of health issues, everything from birth defects to asthma to childhood leukemia, which is obviously incredibly alarming. And it's not only the fracking sites that are risky. Natural gas also causes indoor air pollution. So if you're someone who has a gas stove, for instance, gas stoves have been shown to be emitting harmful things such as nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, and benzene, which is very carcinogenic. These things can leak out even long after the stove has been turned off. And I think this is something that health professionals have been trying to raise awareness around, but there's still a lot of work to be done. There was a study out of the US that showed that 1 in 8 cases of pediatric asthma was linked to indoor air pollution from gas stoves. So that's pretty alarming and significant. I also want to talk through some affordability impacts. So I think everybody on this call knows that affordability has been a key concern for many in BC and continues to be a top priority. We also are seeing gas and electricity prices going up. If you are a FortisBC customer, as I'm sure many of you are, you might have noticed a hike in your gas bills back in February when they started going up about 17%. This is already happening to pay for new fossil fuel infrastructure, such as pipelines, including that pipeline that I mentioned, the Prince Rupert gas transmission pipeline. And what is very likely going to happen soon is that now that we are exporting our LNG officially, that's going to make the affordability crisis even worse. Why? Because we've seen that other countries, such as the US, such as Australia, saw a significant rise in their domestic gas prices once they started exporting LNG. In Australia, their domestic prices tripled, which is not insignificant. And so it's very likely, and economists are starting to sound the alarm that now that we are exporting our LNG, it's likely that we will start to see that same sort of trend happen here as well. Finally, I'll speak to some economic impacts. So I'm not an economist. I will say that right off the bat. But there is significant research from trusted economists who have been putting out reports and warnings saying, hey, the business case for LNG exporting is really quickly weakening. I think that's something that we hear a lot is that, well, okay, maybe natural gas is not the best for the environment. Maybe it's not the best for our health, but at least it's important to the economy. Now we're hearing economists say, no, that's not the case. By the end of this decade, we're seeing projections showing that there's going to be an oversupply of LNG globally. BC is really late to the game. We have all these major exporters, including Russia, the US, and Qatar, who have been exporting LNG for years. You can imagine how much more capacity the United States has than Canada. And so we're entering the game at this really late stage, saying, hey, we want to be involved with this too. But it's late, and we also can't compete on cost against these other countries. Finally, we're seeing that natural gas demand forecasts keep getting revised downward, while at the same time, we're seeing renewable energy generation capacity soaring. So on the one hand, we have natural gas demand falling, renewable energy capacity going up. It simply does not make sense economically for us to be continuing to expand LNG. And what does this mean for us? It means that taxpayers are most likely going to be left on the hook if we are developing LNG infrastructure and then it ends up being a stranded asset. So this is not, in fact, helping Canadians or British Columbians. It's putting us at extreme risk. The last point that I will touch on is about some MAGA connections, and this might be a little bit less expected than some of the other points that I just spoke about. So folks might not be aware, but a lot of the LNG infrastructure in BC is actually being advanced by American investors. Not only are these investors American, many of them have direct ties to the Trump administration. So I've now mentioned a few times PRGT, Prince Rupert Gas Transmission Pipeline, that just got approved in northern BC a few weeks ago. That pipeline is 50% owned by Texas-based Western LNG. One of their main investors is Blackstone Inc. Mara, you can keep going. Yeah, there we go. One of their main investors is Blackstone Inc., which is a notorious private equity firm in the United States. Blackstone's CEO is Steve Schwartzman, who donated more than $39 million to the 2024 presidential race in support of Trump's agenda. What does all of this mean? And he is that individual there at the bottom. What does all of this mean? Well, Premier Eby has been telling British Columbians over and over, elbows up, we need to delink our economy from the United States. We need to diversify our trading partners. And what does he do? He goes and approves this LNG project that is going to put money into the hands of these American Trump-affiliated investors. A lot of these projects that are being put forward are not even going to be built in BC. The Prince Rupert Gas Transmission Pipeline is intended to be linked up to an LNG terminal called Slism's LNG, which is currently being constructed in Korea. So he tells us that he cares about the people of BC, that he'll be creating jobs for us, that he'll be putting money into our pockets, and yet they continue to approve this infrastructure that is American owned and going to support these Trump allies. So this is not us moving in the direction that we should be moving. And the sad thing is that this sort of information is not very widely known. And that's exactly why we felt the need to host this webinar today. So before I pass it over to Deep for the second part of this session today, I just wanted to share a few calls to action. If you are interested by what you heard today and you think, hey, I'd love to get more involved with the BC Climate Emergency Campaign, we would love to have you add your organization as one of our signatories. I mentioned that we have 615 groups who have signed our open letter, which lists these 10 urgent actions that we are seeking from the BC government. So it's a very simple process to sign on. We'll put a link for that into the chat. We would love to have you. Other call to action is we have a fact sheet all about LNG, which just goes into a little bit more detail and provides the sources. So if you want to learn more, please check out that sheet on our website, which will also be going into the chat. And the final call to action, if you feel riled up by this and want to do something about it, we encourage you to meet with your MLA. So over the past 6 months, the BC Climate Emergency Campaign has been really focused on getting our signatory organizations to meet with their MLAs, because they need to hear from constituents that people care about these issues. Something we're hearing from the BC government is, well, climate has fallen to the bottom of the priority list, and so we need to focus on other things. We're going to be focusing on, X, Y, and Z, and we have been trying to show them that's actually not the case. Climate still is a priority, and we see you, and we're paying attention, and we don't support these fossil fuel projects during a climate crisis. So I encourage you to do any of these 3 things listed here. And I'm now really pleased to turn it over to Deep to talk about the LNG and business connections. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emiko. That was such an informative presentation, really eye-opening. And yeah, all those sneaky connections with Mega that just like fly under the radar. So it's great that all of that is being highlighted as well. Yeah, just bear with me for a couple minutes as I start to present my portion of today's webinar. Just getting everything in order. Okay. All right. Perfect. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar on LNG Unpacked, Business, Climate, and Energy Futures. Emiko just gave us a great presentation on the current status of LNG projects around the province and their health and environmental and economical impact and more. And I'll be talking about what LNG means for a business owner and how it can impact your bottom line. But before I delve into the webinar, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional and unceded territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, which is where I live, work, and play. Today, we recognize this land is of the Esquimalt and Songhees Nation. All right, so yeah, this webinar was put together by BCCEC. Emiko gave us a great introduction to their organization, and I just wanted to briefly talk about BC Green Business as well. So what we are is a nonprofit environmental certification program, and we work one-on-one with businesses to find ways to enhance their environmental and their social performance. And right now we have over 300 members across the province. And besides the certification program, we also like to bring the community together and create spaces where like-minded individuals can share their ideas and make connections. We host the Small Business Big Impact events. We recently had one in May, and BCCEC was there as well. So yeah, we've hosted 3 so far, with more planned for the rest of the year. Yeah, and for more information, just be sure to follow us on our social media or sign up for our newsletter. And we also like to create and present webinars on topics that our members show interest in learning about, and also more topical subjects like today's webinar, as well as the last one that we hosted, which was on sustainable procurement, which is quite important, especially under the current geopolitical climate. And so basically how BC Green Business works is members or businesses connect with us through our email or through our website, become a member page. We find time to conduct a site assessment. We assess the business using sector-specific checklists, and then provide them with a customized report of suggested actions along with resources for them to implement them, which gives them an option to kind of like increase their score. And then once all of that is done, we give them their final score certificate, all of the completion materials, and then we also use our social media to highlight their achievements and promote the business. So far, these are all the sectors that we've worked with. So, from office-based businesses or organizations to food and beverage processors, we use sector-specific criteria to kind of help businesses have the highest impact, environmental and social impact within their means. And we have also identified the trade sector as another key sector where lots of impact can be had. So we'll be developing a new checklist to properly assess those businesses, and we'll launch that later this year as well. Okay, so a bit about myself. My name is Deep Chahal, and I work with and I'm a Green Business Associate and Project Manager with Synergy Foundation, which runs the BC Green Business Program. And yeah, I work with businesses on the ground through our assessment program and help them kind of achieve their environmental and social goals and present on educational content around sustainability. Okay. So yeah, with that, here's a high-level view of my portion of the webinar. So we'll be going over why LNG is relevant to the business sector, how it affects your business, looking at kind of available alternatives and business examples, and then finally a call to action. Okay, so if you're a business owner joining us today, you might be here to know why is LNG relevant to your business and the business sector as a whole. On the surface, it might seem like a technical energy issue or a distant infrastructure project, but in reality, LNG is deeply tied to the future business environment, both economically and environmentally. So first, let's talk about the energy costs and reliability. LNG is often framed as a solution for affordable and reliable energy, and that is what matters to business owners. However, as Emiko also uh, talked about, LNG markets are volatile and globally linked, especially when it is being exported, as in the case with BC and Canada, which makes the gas prices really hard to predict and forecast for businesses. If something happens in another part of the world, it can affect prices here too. And then the infrastructure is really hard and expensive to build. So once a company locks into a long-term contract with a LNG provider, which can be up to 15 or 20 years long, it can be really difficult to get out of it, even if the gas prices go up or if cleaner options become more available. And there's also the growing carbon pricing, so which means that companies will need to pay more in the future for the pollution that is being caused by LNG. And so while it might seem like a cheaper option now, it could get more expensive over time. And then there's also the climate targets and regulatory risks. All businesses in Canada operate under the context of net zero goals, carbon pricing, and growing emissions reporting. So if you rely on LNG and any fossil-based energy, then your business may face scrutiny and restrictions. Yeah, and as Emiko talked about earlier, LNG is also a high methane fossil fuel, which, with a significant carbon footprint, and new LNG infrastructure that is being built today would still be in 2050, will still be in use in 2050, which will clash with our emissions reduction timelines because Canada wants to be net zero by 2050. And then furthermore, investment and reputation. So the financial world is changing. More and more investors and banks want to support businesses that care about environment, social responsibility, and good governance, which is called ESG. Again, it stands for environmental, which means protecting nature and reducing pollution, social, treating people fairly, supporting communities, and then governance, which is, being honest, transparent, and well managed. And so, in short, if your business is aligned with climate action, it is in a better position to grow, attract support, and then manage risk in today's economy as well. And according to a consumer survey done by PwC in May last year, around 80% consumers are willing to spend a bit more for sustainable goods. So, that is why you want to be associated with, like having a cleaner, reliable, renewable energy source instead of LNGs. And then there's also the opportunity cost. So choosing LNG today means doubling down on fossil fuel infrastructure. At the very moment, the global economy is pivoting towards renewables. So, every dollar that is being spent on LNG expansion is a dollar not being spent on clean energy alternatives. And at a time when clean energy investments like, solar, wind, electrification are becoming more cost effective and scalable. Um, BC Hydro, for example, offers great rebates for businesses and homeowners to install solar panels to support their renewable energy infrastructure as well. And yeah, let's also take a moment to look at the environmental costs of LNG and related fossil fuel infrastructure. First, the construction of pipelines and LNG facilities can cause serious destruction to ecosystems, disrupting wildlife, damaging sensitive habitats. Then there's also the risk of methane leaks and oil spills, which are not just local disasters, but major climate threats. Um, as Emika was talking about earlier, methane is over 80 times more potent than CO2. So that's a big consideration for everyone involved. And this kind of development also undermines the environmental protection laws and indigenous land rights, especially when projects move forward without, full consent, without full consent and full consultation. And from a climate perspective, the science is really clear. To stay on track for the 1.5 warning limit, global emissions need to drop by 43%, and that is by 2030. So expanding fossil fuels like LNG is like moving in the exact opposite direction. Okay, so we've talked about how LNG is kind of like an unreliable and expensive source. So here I wanted to share a testimonial from one of our members who runs an all-electric landscaping company. So, from their trucks, their cars, leaf blowers, lawnmowers, everything is fully electric. And they've been in business since 2023 and have seen great stability and cost savings because they completely moved away from gas, which is a really volatile resource, as we have all kind of like witnessed since, especially over the past, 5 years since COVID. So yeah, moving towards a more stable renewable energy source, um, can is definitely beneficial for the economy and to kind of plan for your business as well. Yeah, and also a benefit of having fully electric kind of landscaping companies that the equipment that they use don't make any sound as well. So that's something I didn't think about, but every time you hear a annoying uh, leaf blower, think about how nice it would be if everything was electric instead and we didn't have all that noise pollution. But anyways, so we've kind of discussed why LNG is relevant to the business sector. So next we'll discuss a couple of real life examples of how LNG will affect businesses going ahead in the future. First of all, we have supply chain disruption. So, climate-related disruptions are already affecting supply chains, and the risks are growing. We're seeing delays caused by extreme weather events like floods, wildfires, storms, that shut down transportation routes and ports, and sometimes even for weeks at a time. And on top of that, as I mentioned, inflation and price volatility are being driven by things like resource scarcity, rising rebuilding costs, and insurance premiums. And yeah, and finally, we're seeing businesses are facing an increasing pressure from clients to and customers to decarbonize and provide more transparent ESG reporting. But yeah, here I also wanted to pose a question to everyone who's joined us today. Take a moment to kind of reflect on the climate risks that are already affecting your operations and your business. And yeah, feel free to put them in the chat below and kind of have a discussion going. Okay, so supply chain disruptions in recent history. And BC, we've already seen how seriously climate change can disrupt supply chains. And just wanted to reflect on some of the recent events. In 2021, we had the atmospheric river floods, which shut down major highways, the Coquihalla, the Trans-Canada, cutting off access to lower mainland for days. Goods couldn't move and shelves went empty. And the estimated economic impact for that was $9 billion, out of which 1 to 2 billion was from supply chain delays and business losses, which is the costliest natural disaster in Canadian history. And then we have wildfires that affect forestry and transportation, costing about $1 to $2 billion per year. In 2021, especially, we had 8,600 square kilometers burned, leading to mill closures and transport delays, millions lost in timber value, and equipment loss. In 2023, again, we had fires that led to evacuation of entire towns like West Kelowna, causing various business shutdowns. And then we have rising droughts as well, which impact agriculture and have been on the rise. There were lower crop yields in the Okanagan fruit and Fraser Valley, kind of like feed production. Industries also, face water rationing and shutdowns. Whereas when like we had Emiko talk about earlier, when you're fracking, you have kind of like a free access to all this water, whereas other major industries are facing that rationing due to climate change. And then we have Port of Vancouver that, has various disruptions. The floods of 2021 kind of blocked Vancouver, the largest port in Canada, for weeks. There were thousands of containers that were delayed, and that had a long-term impact on trade reliability, insurance costs, and led to kind of like an economic impact again from like about up to $2.5 million. But yeah, there's also the increased cost of LNG, and since that directly impacts your bottom dollar, that's something important to talk about for especially from a business's standpoint. And yeah, even though LNG is being produced for export to other countries, it is going to affect gas prices here in BC and likely in a pretty big way. LNG exports are huge compared to our own gas use. Much of LNG Canada's, LNG Canada facility alone will be exporting 3 times as much gas as all of BC uses in a year. This means like a big chunk of BC's gas supply will now be sold to other countries instead of being used locally. And that leads to gas prices increase. And we've seen indications of this already. The 2025 provincial budget already expects gas prices to go up 25% in 2025 and up 49% by 2026. And this is partly because more gas is being exported, leaving less for local use. And as we saw, starting April 2025, the carbon tax was removed, and that saves, households and businesses a few $100s, but essentially that can also lead to, hiding the LNG price hikes. But if prices keep on going, people will still end up paying more overall, even though the taxes are being axed. And once gas prices go up, they rarely come down. Yeah, and as well, Emiko mentioned earlier, Fortis is already raising prices. They raised it by 17.5% earlier this year. And this wasn't even due to gas being more expensive. It was mostly due to other charges, or maybe for Fortis to secure bigger profits before LNG exports start pushing up the actual cost of gas. So how can a business respond to this? The answer is to increase efficiency, reduce waste, whether it is, your energy waste or physical waste, electrify your operations, and support renewable energy. This is another business example that I wanted to share. The Okanagan Spring Brewery, they've taken some great steps towards improving their energy efficiency. For starters, they focused on reducing energy waste across their operations. And for this, you don't even need investment. A lot of savings can be had through behavioral changes, such as, um, turning off and unplugging equipment when not in use, or turning down the heat when the space is unoccupied, monitoring your utilities bill for unusual spikes. They also retrofitted their entire facility with LED lighting, which is a simple change that makes a big difference in energy savings. BC Hydro has lighting rebates available for commercial and residential customers. And yeah, from my personal experience, I would say that is a very approachable first step for any business. And on the more technical side, they installed waste heat recovery vaporizer, basically capturing heat that would have been wasted from their boiler and using that to improve their efficiency. And they're not just stopping there. They are working towards electrifying their boilers and other equipment, which will not only reduce the costs associated with their operations, but also cut emissions over time. So yeah, another example of actions taken by businesses in BC. Okay, so what alternatives do businesses have to turn away from or reduce their reliance on fossil fuels or LNG? Thankfully, there's many alternatives available right now that are better for the planet and often better for your bottom line as well. You know, you can switch to renewable electricity like solar or hydro. Thankfully, in BC, we have hydro, which has a really small carbon footprint, and we can be using that to power our operations with clean energy, electrifying your equipment. So, from vehicles to heating systems, you can reduce your reliance on fossil fuels. Improving energy efficiency is another great step. Think LED lighting again, but also HVAC systems are a great example. Compared to traditional gas furnaces, they can be up to 400 or 600% more efficient. And, that is cost savings over time. Building upgrades, which can be as simple as insulating your windows and proofing your doors. And then also, supporting clean local supply chains, which lowers transport emissions and strengthens the local economy. And finally, it is important to track and report your emissions so you can kind of measure your own progress, set goals, and stay accountable. And to wrap things up, here's what businesses can do right now to be a part of the solution. First, saying no to LNG expansion. As we've seen, it's risky, polluting, and doesn't allow with a low carbon future. Next, sharing your climate commitments publicly. Transparency builds trust and also encourages others to step up too. You can also join business networks like BC Green Business and BCCEC, which are focused on sustainability. There's powers in numbers, and collaborating for impact helps push for bigger change. And then finally, taking action to future-proof your business. The earlier you adapt, the more resilient and competitive you'll be. So yeah, we've covered a lot today. So now we'll have some time for Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and yeah, use the raise your hand feature and we will go through everyone. And also, or put your questions in the chat. We'll go through those as well. And I've shared these QR codes to BC Green Business and BCC EC here. So if you're interested in becoming a BC Green Business member or have general questions around sustainability, feel free to reach us via our email or using the contact form on our website. Follow us on Instagram to stay up to date with events and future webinars. And I would also like to encourage you to take a look at BCCEC's website. They're aiming to grow their list of signatories, so please consider signing up for that as well. Okay, so yeah, with that, moving on to the Q&A session. I see Sarah has her hand up. Hi,
Hey,
Sarah.
hi, I'm from Smithers Climate Action and I have living in a resource extraction region.
Mhm.
I think there could be a lot of room for unity among tradespeople and people working in these industries, but they need to see people like us saying that we're not that we're pushing for jobs, trade jobs like the green transition that we don't talk about much anymore, because otherwise it's just causing divisiveness. And I think we really need support up here from the general public, and we'll get that if with this campaign we're also putting out ideas about where these tradespeople should be working. Otherwise, it's just pitting people against people. And I was wondering if you and Emiko have any ideas about that, if that could be part of the campaign, just so there's unity as opposed to divisiveness.
Yeah, that's a great question. Emiko, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think it's really that's why a just transition is so important. Because of course a lot of folks who are employed by the fossil fuel industry feel can feel quite threatened when they're hearing about ramping down fossil fuel use and increasing renewable energy use, because that means, well, I'm now out of a job. And so I fully think that there should be a lot more work. I mean, the BC government should be putting together a just transition plan for the province so that nobody gets left behind, particularly those folks who are involved in the fossil fuel industry, whatever that may look like. So I think it's important to remember that when we are talking about reducing and completely eliminating fossil fuels, it's always important to remember that we are not demonizing the folks who are employed in that industry, because there's no use in, like you said, pitting people against each other and just making people feel guilty or like they're the enemy or anything like that. So yeah, I wish that there was more happening around just transition, and that, you know, the government should be offering to support these folks as we transition, and that's not really happening.
Yeah, I think, yeah, Emiko, you make a great point. And yeah, something that I wanted to just add to that is, especially for the trades industry, um, it's pretty impactful. And there's ways where we can kind of like create more impact where they're maybe they relearn some of their skills. Instead of like demolition, there's a huge trend towards deconstruction. That's just an example. So kind of like retraining those tradespeople to use their skills, which they already have, and then apply it to something that is kind of like less damaging as well.
Maybe we can move to a question that was in the chat, Deep.
Yeah,
There was a question from Jim that I want to speak to,
sure.
because Jim mentions the electrification issue, which we didn't really raise in this webinar. But Jim says, my understanding is that if all of our precious green hydro generated power is needed for basically the liquefaction of natural gas, you know, what does that mean for electricity available for consumers and for the rest of BC and households and businesses? And that's a really important point, that you know, BC does have a really significant amount of renewable energy generation, and that is increasing, and BC Hydro is doing a great job increasing that capacity. But basically, with all of this new LNG infrastructure, what's happening is that clean electricity is getting diverted away from the homes and businesses, and being used to now electrify LNG facilities. That's not what we have been asking for. And there's simply not enough clean electricity to go around for all of those purposes. And so that's another really important factor at play, and something that we are trying to speak up against. So thank you for raising that, Jim.
Yeah, definitely. And we've also seen from kind of like BC Hydro, their stance has also moved more towards kind of generating more renewable energy because there is so much demand now, with like businesses transitioning to kind of like electrifying their operations. And then when we have a huge kind of like an LNG plant that's going to divert so much of our renewable energy towards that, that's going to mean less electricity. And that's kind of also why we've seen that recent push towards creating your own renewable energy by adding more solar farms, or solar panels, and then also a push towards more efficient equipment so that we are just using less electricity. But yeah, that's a great point, Jim, that you talked about. Great. I guess, Farooq, you've had your hand raised for a while. We can move on to your question.
Hi, sorry, I'm actually traveling a bit, so apologies for any background noise. The first comment I wanted to make was that Amika's point is excellent about the just transition. But before we get there, we must get commitment from provincial and federal governments to at least commit to a phase out plan legislatively, because what we lack right now is that commitment to phasing it out in the first place. So I think that is what's going to set the stage for what that transition plan looks like. Totally with you on that. I think the other point is that the businesses must be aware that, of course, the damage that they have to face in the form of various climate impacts is due to the fossil fuel industries themselves. And I'm representing the Peaceful Society Science and Innovation Foundation, where we are supporting scientific evidence for the Sue Big Oil campaign, which is actually a BC-led campaign by the West Coast Environmental Law. And there we are trying to, again, using climate litigation, set up a class action lawsuit where, again, we're taking action against the fossil fuel industry that is, again, getting in an upside down way subsidized for the very crimes that they're committing. And at the end of the day, the businesses and people who have little to do or to do anything with these types of impacts end up paying. So we're trying under the principles of fairness, the fossil fuel to pay for their damage using scientific evidence. So I think I just wanted to highlight and raise awareness of these actions that must happen too, because otherwise I think, as we're seeing right now, there's a lot of rhetoric out there, but no commitment to actual change.
Yeah, thanks, Farouk. There's a lot of, to use a word that I mentioned at the beginning, greenwashing going on behalf of federal and provincial and other governments.
Yes.
That is one of the biggest hurdles that we have to overcome. And I think a big part of that is also part of what we're trying to do here today, which is climate literacy for the general population, so that people are able to identify greenwashing when it's happening, and call it out and speak up for the actual climate solutions that we need. Thank you for sharing that comment. I'm just wondering if you want to stop sharing the screen, Deep, so we can see people, if folks have had a chance to look at the QR code. And I wanted, if it's okay, to go to another question in the chat. Abby put a question, and there are a few other questions that are kind of similar, about one, like, how do we move the needle on this issue? And how do we talk to people about the dangers of LNG if they are embedded within those systems? And I'm combining these questions because I think that the answer is similar. I think that it is about doing what we can to talk to our elected officials and let them know that we are unhappy with what's happening. If they think that they are being supported, they're just going to keep on going and doing what they're doing. It's up to us to use our voices and hold them accountable and say, no, British Columbians are not happy with what you're doing. And their job is to listen to us. If they want to stay in power, they need to listen to the people. I think it's difficult, as Abby said, you know, when you're trying to speak to somebody who is really embedded in this industry and reliant to live. I think it's challenging. And I want to recognize that. And I think you can kind of do some gentle educating, you know, if it gets if it's kind of going to be harming your relationship, then, you know, do what you have to do. But I think encouraging people to meet with their officials is really important. We need more advocacy, in my opinion. We need more people taking responsibility and standing up and you know, saying no to these project proposals. I think the government is able to kind of rely on people being distracted by daily struggles of having to focus on paying rent and paying for groceries, and not having the time or energy to pay attention to some of these projects that they're kind of quietly pushing through, hoping that nobody notices. And so it's important for us to say, well, actually we are noticing and we are not happy. So I hope that answers that question and makes sense. Are there any other questions? I'm trying to look through the chat and see if there's anything else in here.
Yeah, if we've missed any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. We still have a couple of minutes. Fark, did you
Yeah.
want to share something again?
Yes, I would say that we must be clear as to who's causing these things, right? So I think with respect to the corporations, the fossil fuel industry, and of course the government, the authorities that are in cahoots with them, and I think we must demand as you know, as communities that are under threat and have faced a lot of impacts, a plan to defossilize. Because and a plan with some you know, legislative backing, because without that plan, you know, we're not saying that shut this down tomorrow, because we do have a dependency on these energies, so that's not going to happen. But without that plan, without the demand of that plan, we are not going to get any, you know, whenever you want to get to some resolution, you also need commitment, and that is not showing up. They will always sort of say that they're meeting one target or another, but I think a plan has to be, and I'd be very happy to work with the BC Climate Emergency Unit to build that with people, because I think that plan has been not shared, or you know, we kind of they kind of slide into emission targets, but to defossilize by X by 2030, for example, or some year that they commit, is, I think, critical at this stage.
Thanks, Farouk. I'm wondering if, Valerie, you have a quick question that we can quickly get to, and then we'll close up.
Okay, so yeah, slide 7 of yours had a figure with coal versus LNG. Did it include the extraction process of coal? And you know, when it's transported by train, I remember there were issues with coal flying off and creating black dust on the sides of the train tracks.
Yeah, in the chart, it kind of groups the upstream emissions together, so it doesn't specifically say like extraction, but
Okay.
the upstream does include that, and
Perfect.
like the transportation and all of it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Deep, do you want to close us off?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you again. We had a great turnout today, so I'm really grateful for everyone who joined us. Yeah, and to thanks to Emiko, for your presentation, and all the questions that we've had in the chat have been really meaningful and really eye-opening for myself, and I'm sure for others as well. So yeah, looking forward to the other 3 webinars in the series. And yeah, if you have any questions, you know where to find us. Thank you again for taking the time today. That's all.
Thank you, Deep. And you'll be sending out the recording, right?
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much,
Thank
everybody.
you all.
Have a great rest of your day.